Now, I know the Clippers lost in the play-in tournament and they didn't make the playoffs, but that doesn't mean that this season should be viewed as a failure for them. I think a lot of shit happened that was out of their control and simply unlucky, to the point where this season should be viewed as a positive, mainly even a success, and I'll explain why. I have two headlines for the team. They're pretty general, pretty broad. The first one, Kawhi missed the whole year, PG missed more than half, and Norm was immediately injured after being traded to the Clippers. Kawhi missed the whole year. There was a lot of speculation where people thought he could return after the All-Star break, maybe even return in the playoffs if the Clippers were able to make it, but that didn't come into fruition. PG was looking like an early season MVP candidate before his injury, so he only played 30 or so games. And then the Norm pickup, the Clippers really needed offense. They got Norm. He was showing out. He was dropping 20 points per game, and then he was immediately injured and wasn't able to finish the season for them. So yeah, that was just a lot of unlucky shit that the Clippers could not control. But what kept this team afloat and what kept them respectable was their defense. They had a really rugged defense. There's not a lot of elite defensive personnel on this team. Terrance Mann was probably their best defender. Batum was really good. Really, really good, actually. Eric Bledsoe was good in his time there before being traded away. And then Rocco was good after he was picked up. But, not a lot of elite defensive personnel. But this team was still able to be top third in defensive rating. Now, specifically talking about players, we're going to start with the dynamic duo, the top performers for the Clippers, Kawhi and PG. As for Kawhi, he's still this team's franchise player. He's the guy. Basically, this team will go as far as he takes them in 2023 if he's at full health. But that could be a big question mark because he's suffered a couple of injuries where he's had to miss an entire year. I think 2? He missed the entire year in San Antonio. He missed the entire year in the Clippers for this year. So yeah, those are 2 really big injuries. He's had a lot of nagging injuries that teams have had to load manage for. So, we'll see if he's going to be the same when he comes back in 2023. Fit-wise, he just signed a big-ass extension that's going to have him signed through the 2023 to 2024 season, giving him a $48 million player option for the 2024 to 2025 season. So, yeah, he's going to be a Clipper for life. As for Paul George, elite shot creator, he's a great number 2 option behind Kawhi. He's a much improved playmaker. We kind of saw this year. With him playing without Kawhi, he went up to 5.7 assists per game. Turned the ball over a bit, but he's not a point guard. And we know he's a great defender. Him and Kawhi, both great defensive wings. Fit-wise, it's pretty much the same thing because the two signed exactly the same contract. They're going to be signed through 2023 to 2024 with a player option for 2024 to 2025. Moving to prospects, I have one for the Clippers, and it's Terrance Mann. He's 25 years old, but it was only his 3rd season this year, and only his 2nd one really contributing that much. His strengths, he has a high defensive motor, he's a great cutter, and he's a really, really good athlete, really mobile, and he rebounds really well for his position. His high defensive motor was what got him minutes in the first place, and he didn't lose it this season. His main source of offense comes from either catch and shoots or him cutting off the ball, backdoor, or running hard in the fast break for some easy looks inside that he's able to create himself because he cuts and runs so hard to the rim. And yeah, like I said, he rebounds really well for being a 6'4", 6'5" shooting guard. He got 5 or 6 rebounds per game in 29 minutes. So the only real weakness I have for him is shot creation on the perimeter. He was a solid 3-point shooter this season. He was an improved playmaker, but I won't say those two things are strengths of his. But they're definitely not weaknesses. The only weakness in his game is being able to create his own offense on the perimeter. And I don't think he's ever really got to work on that. His role going forward is just going to be a 3-and-D guy who can cut off the ball hard, play hard, and just improving as a playmaker. Kind of similar type of playmaking to Bruce Brown in Brooklyn. I talked about the 3-point shooting and playmaking. Those are going to be his ceiling determiners. If he can be a knockdown 3-point guy, get over 36, get to 37, 38 per season, percentage wise, consistently, and then continuing to improve as a playmaker, Ty Lue gave him more opportunities to run the offense, especially in the fast break. He gave him more confidence to run the offense in the fast break, and that was honestly where he was best in terms of playmaking. So, talking about some other guys, we'll talk about Reggie. Because he was available throughout the entire year, he was the Clippers' lead shot creator from the beginning of the year to the end, with PG being injured. We know Reggie's not supposed to be a number one option. That's obvious. But he had to do so because who else was going to really create offense and be the engine of this offense? He averaged 16 or 17 points per game. Efficiency wasn't great. He shot below 40% from the field and below 33% from three, but he's not supposed to be a number one option. He tried his fucking best. I think when PG and Kawhi are back next year, Norman Powell will be on this team. Reggie Jackson as a number 3 or number 4 option on the offensive end will really be efficient. Like I think he could have the best year, like the most productive, most efficient year of his career next season with those guys coming back into the fold. Talking about Zubac, he's just a great pick and roll guy. He's a big ass motherfucker. He's like 7 feet tall legitimately. He's pretty mobile. He's more mobile than he looks. So he's a really good pick and roll option. He's continuing to improve as a pick and roll defender, though he's always going to be limited in that space because he's not quick enough to be able to switch and defend in space. But he's still improving on that front, and he's only 24 years old. He's younger than Terrance Mann, and I don't view Zubac as a prospect because he's pretty much been playing meaningful basketball for the past 4 seasons, so I don't think he's a prospect anymore. Luke Kennard was another big reason why the Clippers offense was able to stay respectable. He was the best shooter in the league. He shot 45% from 3 on 6 attempts per game. So his 3-point shooting was big time for the Clippers. And he's never really only been a catch and shoot guy. He's always had some on-ball capabilities, especially with playmaking. He's a solid playmaker. As for Norman Powell, I've alluded to him a bit. He was pretty fucking good in his few games with the Clippers. 20 points per game on 50 from the field and 50 from 3. That efficiency isn't going to continue over an entire season, but I mean, we know Norman Powell is an instant offense type of guy, and him being like the third option behind Kawhi and PG going into next season should really make this Clippers offense high powered. Now looking to the offseason, I know it's called an offseason outlook, but there's not much to talk about, believe it or not. They don't have a first round pick because they traded away so many to get PG. They have a second round pick at 43, but I don't dive that deep into the draft class. I know just enough to talk about like a mock draft for the first round. So I can't really provide anything in the draft focus. As for the free agency focus, there's also not that much to talk about. Like pretty much this core is going to be exactly the same going into next season. They're $48 million over the cap space, so they don't have that much flexibility. The only real significant free agents for them are going to be Nicholas Batum and Isaiah Hartenstein, and Batum's on a player option, so there's no guarantee that he will be a free agent. But as for player need, I think they could use a backup point guard. I'm pretty sure Reggie Jackson is going to be the full-time starting point guard next season, so I think getting a veteran backup preferably would be best in the cards for them, and they're going to have to do this with minimum contracts. A backup center could be cool too. Like I know Isaiah Hartenstein was cool, but maybe they want somebody of, I don't know, higher capability, higher impact. And then some forward insurance for if Nicholas Batum looks for brighter pastures elsewhere. As for potential targets, all these are going to be potential minimum contract guys. For backup point guard, I got Goran Dragic and Trey Burke. Goran could see the Clippers as a potential championship contender because he hasn't gotten a ring yet. He thought he would be able to get that in Brooklyn. Wasn't able to. And we saw in his playoff series against Boston that he, even though he is getting older, he can still contribute to a contending team. The dynamic duo of PG and Kawhi will be back. We got Norman Powell and Reggie Jackson as capable third and fourth creators. A bunch of good role players in Zubac, Rocco, Kennard. Add Dragic to that list, and that could really solidify the Clippers as a contender. Trey Burke is probably the backup option. He's always been a cool, backup point guard that can get hot and put 20 points up in a game. Just because he has that potential from three-point land. He's got a dynamic handle. For backup centers, they could try to bring back Hartenstein or Thomas Bryant could be a minimum option. He was injured for half the season in Washington, and when he came back, he wasn't able to play at the same caliber that he displayed in his prior 2 seasons in Washington. So maybe his value is a bit lower. Kristaps Porzingis and Daniel Gafford being there, Washington really doesn't need him anymore. So if he was looking for a place to like redisplay his value, the Clippers could be a perfect place for that. And as for forward insurance, I got TJ Warren and Juan Toscano Anderson, 2 vastly different players. So TJ Warren has been injured basically for the past 2 seasons entirely. And before that, we saw him in a starting role in Indiana, put up around 20 points per game, and then go into the bubble and look like Michael Jordan. We haven't seen him since that bubble. So for that reason, though we know he is a dynamic offensive player, he's been out for 2 seasons, his value might be at an all-time low. He's only 28 years old, so he's got some time left in his basketball career. So if he wants to use this season as like a tryout, or like I said, just another opportunity to redisplay his value, I think the perfect place to do so would be in LA with the Clippers. And then as for Juan Toscano Anderson, he's just a role player that's going to fit pretty much in any team because he's always going to play hard. You know that he's the hardest playing motherfucker out there 99% of the time. He's really versatile on the defensive end. He's a streaky 3-point shooter, though I'd say in general he's an above average 3-point shooter. And he's been playing winning basketball in Golden State for the past 2 seasons. And he's going to be going to the NBA Championship Series where he might be able to further show how good of a role player he can be. Though I think he could be attainable for like a minimum contract, though I think his value could fluctuate just because he's so versatile on the defensive end. As for the offseason trade market, I only have Marcus Morris on the trade block, mainly because if the Clippers wanted to add a quote-unquote star, Marcus Morris has the biggest contract behind Kawhi and Paul George. Actually, no, he has the second biggest behind Norman Powell, but I think the Clippers are looking to keep Norman Powell long-term. So I think if anybody was going to be on the block, it would be Marcus Morris. In terms of what the Clippers could be targeting, I've heard rumors about Rudy Gobert, Mike Conley, and Malcolm Brogdon. They all make sense, like, with the Jazz continuing to disappoint year in and year out in the postseason, it might be time for them to sell and rebuild, and Gobert and Conley could be on the outs. As for Malcolm Brogdon, kind of the same thing, not on a timeline of a rebuild, so if the Pacers were looking to liquidate his value, he could be on the market too. But I don't think Gobert and Brogdon are really attainable for the Clippers. For one, those are big contracts. For two, they don't really have like a package to get those two, because those two are stars. Like those two are stars. Rudy Gobert, though he gets a lot of hate, he's a defensive star. And then Malcolm Brogdon is just like an all-around point guard. He can do like a little bit of everything. He's a good defender, good playmaker, can create his own offense inside and out. Mike Conley might be attainable, making around $22 million per year. So that's closer to the Marcus Morris contract, and he's a lot older. He's 35 years old. So you might not have to attach that much to a Marcus Morris contract to get Mike Conley. With that being said, I predict the Clippers to have a quiet offseason, and that's the only prediction I have. They don't have any first round picks until 2027, and none of them are going to be tradable until 2028. So to the Marcus Morris contract, they'd have to attach BJ Boston as the sole enticing young prospect. Like, you could say Terrance Mann, but the man, quote, or pun, is 25 years old, so he's not really a prospect like that. So, like, the Clippers don't really have very enticing trade packages to teams that are selling their top performers. I feel like the Clippers really flew under the radar this season. Yes, we were kind of looking forward to how PG would respond to Kawhi missing the entire season, but a lot of the attention on the Clippers dissipated once he suffered an injury. Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris did their absolute best to pick up the scoring slack left behind. 3-point shooting from the role players Kennard, Covington, Batum, and Hartenstein also helped this offense survive. Though the primary reason the Clippers were able to surpass expectations was their quality defense. Credit can be spread through the entire team, but I'll highlight Terrance Mann on this front. Though the Clippers missed the playoffs via 2 losses in the tourney, we still have to credit Ty Lue for the team finishing above 500. It was one hell of a coaching job. Looking to the offseason, the Clippers won't have a first-round draft pick, and they'll be $48 million over the salary cap. Steve Ballmer can easily afford the luxury tax, but their roster flexibility will be limited on those two fronts. Any significant roster shakeup will have to occur via an offseason trade, using the contracts of Marcus Morris and or Robert Covington. Time flies like a motherfucker because we'll be entering the 4th year of the Kawhi PG partnership, and it doesn't feel like it at all. Partly because these two have been in and out of the lineup so much due to injuries and load management. Regardless, these are still two of the top two-way wings in all of basketball, and they both should be 100% going into training camp. With a proven supporting cast, a Kawhi Leonard-Paul George partnership guarantees serious championship consideration.